courtyards of Lefuel's north wing were intended to be just courtyards. These open courtyards are visible in Visconti's plan of 1854. The buildings themselves were conceived as administrative blocks. The courtyards belonged to the relevant ministries. A drawing by Lefuel shows the glass canopy proposed for the entrance to the Minister of State's staircase. After the fall of the Empire, and after the Commune, the destruction and damage to the Louvre, the Tuileries, and other places was severe. The Ministry of Finance building in the Rue de Rivoli was gutted, and the ministry found itself without any headquarters. The head of state of the new republic, Adolphe Thiers, handed over the north wing of the Louvre to that ministry. Ground floor plans of 1880 to 1890 show offices in two of the courtyards of the finance ministry, while the first floor plans show them roofed with glass. Plans of 1900 and 1940 show no glass roofs. The courtyards are still open to the sky in aerial photographs taken before the building of the glass pyramid. There is even a later plan, including the pyramid, which also shows the courtyards unroofed. It was the project of the Grand Louvre under President Mitterrand, together with his building of a new Ministry of Finance at Bercy, which finally saw, in 1989, all these courtyards roofed and incorporated into the museum. The westernmost courtyard, the ministerial courtyard, became the Marly Courtyard. The middle courtyard, the Cour des Caisses, became the Puget Courtyard. The easternmost courtyard, the post office courtyard, became the Kochsabad Courtyard. These courtyards are not precise rectangles. Because the old Louvre and the Tuileries Palace were not built parallel to each other, and their length north to south is not equal, the lines of buildings joining them cannot be either parallel or equal in length. Therefore the courtyards are convex equilaterals, disguised to appear rectangular. The irregular shapes made the double glazing and air conditioning particularly difficult to install, and expensive, costing 60 million francs. The results, however, especially in the case of the Marly and Puget courtyards, are spacious, paved sculpture gardens, which display their contents much better than the overcrowded and dim rooms in which they were previously housed. The Marly Courtyard is named after the estate which, in his later years, King Louis XIV preferred to the courtly, formal grandeur of Versailles. It was conceived in 1678. Louis XIV first visited it in 1683 and first stayed there in 1686. The king's residence was in the midst of gardens which consisted of pools, fountains, bushes and trees, with no emphasis on flowers. On both sides of the main water feature were the pavilions reserved for those fortunate courtiers whom the king chose to invite. The most famous of the many sculptures are the Marly horses. Mercury riding Pegasus, the winged horse, and Renown or Fame riding Pegasus, both glorifying Louis XIV, were carved by Antoine Coisevaux. Some people pronounce Coisevaux. Stucco models, resistant to the weather, were situated in 1694 beside the horses' watering place, and they were replaced by the marbles when they were finished in 1702. In 1719, the marble horses were moved to the entrance to the Tuileries Gardens, at what was then the Place Louis XV, now Place de la Concorde. Louis XV commissioned 2 replacements for Marly in 1743. The 2 different Carrara marble sculptures of a rearing horse restrained by its groom, both by Guillaume Coustou, were put beside the watering place at Marly in 1745. Guillaume and Nicolas Coustou were brothers, both sculptors, who often worked together. They were nephews of Antoine Coisevaux. After the abolition of the monarchy and the execution of Louis XVI, the marble horses were removed from Marly in 1794 and were set up at the end of the Champs-Élysées in the Place de la Concorde, at that time known as the Place de la Révolution. It took 16 horses and 5 hours to drag them to that position. The estate at Marly fell into decay and was finally demolished in the 19th century. The buildings of the king's domain at Marly having now completely disappeared, the area became a rural retreat for painters such as Alfred Sisley, who lived at Marly-le-Roi for about 2 years. As part of an attempt to show what the royal park at Marly was like, bushes have now been planted and there are replicas of statues. In 1984, it was decided that the marble horses in the Place de la Concorde were being damaged by the mechanical military parade which takes place on July the 14th every year. Marble replicas were commissioned from Michel Bourbon in 1986. The originals were taken to the Louvre, and Bourbon's main copies were taken to Marly. The 4 horses are now focal points in the Cour Marly. The courtyard is on 5 levels, ascending from the lowest at the east end, beside the Passage Richelieu, to the highest at the west end, overlooked by the ministerial apartments. At each of the levels, the garden aspect of this sculpture garden is emphasized by the placing of trees, urns, and vases. On the lowest level, the 2 main sculptures are Meleager killing a boar and Meleager killing a stag, both by Nicolas Coustou. These are appropriate subjects because Marly had originally been a place for hunting and regained that function when Napoleon I bought the estate back in 1811. It long remained a hunting ground. President Mitterrand was one of those who hunted there. 2 large plinths flank 6 broad steps, leading up to the next level. These plinths carry sculpted personifications of rivers. These and other sculpted allegories and divinities of the waters are also appropriate ornaments for Marly, given its notable water features, including one called the River, and also the proximity of the Machine de Marly, which pumped water to the many fountains at Versailles. On the southern side are the Loire and the Loiret by Corneille van Clèves, and on the northern side the Seine and the Marne by Nicolas Coustou. The steps between these plinths and statues, go up to the next level, a brief one, which leads only to the stairways rising towards the north and the south to the next level. This third level up has the shape of a concave octagon, its arms embracing the lower levels. The balcony, formed by the central part of the third level up, is occupied by two reclining nymphs. They do not face down, but look up towards statues which stand or sit as if on a stage on the next level, 6 steps up from them. One is the nymph Arethusa, who was transformed into water to protect her from the advances of the river god Alpheus. She is also patroness of the pool in Sicilian Syracuse. Here she presides over a pot from which her river flows, in a statue carved by Claude Poirier. The other nymph is the Nereid Amphitrite, wife of Neptune and goddess of the sea, caressing a dolphin as carved by Jacques Proust. At the southeast corner of this level stands Aeneas, carrying his father Anchises as they flee from the flames consuming Troy. He was sculpted by Pierre Lepautre after a wax model by François Girardon. At the northeast corner stand Aria and her husband Kaikinapaitus. She has stabbed herself with the dagger wrenched from his hand to encourage him when he was unable to obey the Emperor Claudius's order to commit suicide. This group was carved by Pierre Lepautre after a design by Jean-Baptiste Théodon. Other figures populate the arms of this level, extending westward. The 6 steps that the nymphs face rise between 2 tall plinths that carry the rearing horses of Marly, restrained by their grooms. The statues on this stage-like platform, 4 water divinities, all sculpted by Antoine Coisevaux, are from left to right, south to north, Neptune, bearded, threatening a seahorse with his trident. The river Seine, bearded, seated, holding his emblematic paddle, with a young satyr on the ground beside him, stealing his grapes. The river Marne, seated, with her horn of plenty and her urn, a child at her feet, leaning on another urn. Amphitrite, seated, a mer-child at her feet, showing off the treasures of the sea. In a dominating position above and behind these statues are the other horses of Marly, Renown and Mercury riding Pegasus, at the top of the two staircases which rise eastwards to the top level of the courtyard. The top level has again the shape of a concave octagon. The northern arm of this terrace has two groups of mythological runners. One is Daphne, pursued by Apollo, both by Nicolas Coustou. Near the columns which were rescued from the ruins of the Tuileries Palace and then erected in the Tuileries Gardens, and which are now in the Cour Marly, Hippomenes and Atalanta race. Hippomenes, sculpted by Guillaume Coustou, holding in his hand, ready to drop, a golden apple, which Atalanta will stop to pick up. Atalanta, sculpted by Pierre Lepôtre. This arm also displays one of the earliest sculptures in the courtyard, Two Children and a Goat by Jacques Sarrazin of 1640, bought by Louis XIV in 1667, later taken to Marly, and in 1702 placed on the table-like pedestal carved for it by Armand Solignon and Nicolas Montéan. On the southern arm, the sculptures include Wrestlers by Philippe Magnier, Fawn with a Kid by Pierre Lepôtre. Mercury by Dominique Lefebvre. In a central position, standing out in bronze, is Dawn, stepping from her chariot, by Philippe Magnier, after a model by François Girardon. A marble version without the chariot is at Versailles. Dawn has 3 marble statues on each side of her. To the left of Dawn, north, is the huntsman at rest, flanked by 2 nymphs, one with a dove, one with a quiver of arrows. Both are also called Nymph of the Hunt. All three statues are by Nicolas Coustou. To the right of Dawn, south, is the shepherd playing a flute, flanked by Flora and a hamadryad. All are by Antoine Coisevaux. It will be noticed that many of these figures have behind them a child, a fawn, a dog, and/or other objects. These do not merely serve to support the upper part of the sculpture, but are also the consequence of the statues being placed in the Marly Park, where they were to be seen from all sides. In the 21st century, various events have taken place in the Marly Courtyard. A concert of the music of Vivaldi and Mozart is planned to take place there on March the 24th, 2025.